we're going to be watching very closely. Um, and then one other item I think that we have seen actually, we knew there'd be one big bill that touched on guardianship issues and alternatives to guardianship. But over the last about 2 weeks, we've actually seen a number of other bills come out around guardianship, and one of them actually touching on voting and guardianship. And so that's one of the other big issues I think we're going to be watching this year that we're going to be seeing a lot of. And so with that, I don't know, Andrew, do you want to touch on a few of the bills that we're monitoring on those fronts, or does that work for you, sir?
Yeah.
Well, I will turn it over to Andrew and try to mute myself so there's not much of an echo.
As Nate said, I think our our focus so far has been on the guardianship bills and the voting bills. We know the the big voting bill so far that we know of is HB 300, and that's one of the bills um, that would make uh, preference in-person voting instead of by mail voting, and that is probably one of the bills that is going to move forward because it is the bill that's supported by the Speaker of the House, Representative Schultz. Although we do hear that Senate leadership is also possibly working on their own proposal. So um, hopefully we will see that soon and be able to provide you a comparison between the two and let you know if one is potentially better for voters with disabilities than the other. But as Nate said, it is a tough changes to our changes to the way we vote is one of the big topics this session. So we probably are going to see something passed. It's just a question of that something will be. The other topics are that Nate mentioned that's gotten a lot of our attention so far this session has been guardianship, and one the bill that we have been working for the last 2 years on with is HB 334 with Representative Abbott, and that that has um, two pieces in it, and one of one of the pieces is um, a change some changes to the Guardianship Bill of Rights that Representative Abbott passed a couple years ago. The main change in that is to um, allow the courts to um, it gives the courts some direction about rights that the court is not able to waive under any circumstances, and court and rights that the court uh, is able to modify or waive if the court thinks that there is evidence and good reason for it to do so. That's one piece of the bill. The second piece is the supported decision making bill that we've talked with you about in years past, and we think we have come to a good compromise with some of some family members who are guardians and were concerned about um, the impact the impact of a potential supported decision making on their guardianship, and so we think we've come to a reasonable compromise um, in that area. And Nate, remind me what Senator Stratton's the number is. Thank you. The second, as Nate just said, the second guardianship bill is from Senator Stratton, and it is SB 199. It just came out a couple of days ago. We were not expecting to see it, so it was a bit of a surprise. Um, and what it basically says is that um, if um, a person has a, severe intellectual disability and has a guardian, that they do not that other than the basic other than the basic process other than the basic process right to um to know what's happening with their guardianship, or ask a court to consider something related to their guardianship. They would not have any of the meaningful rights um, under according to the Guardianship Bill of Rights. So it basically clarifies that the Guardianship Bill of Rights does not apply to somebody who ha has a a guardian and intellect a severe intellectual disability. The um, the third the third bill that is in this area that we want to make you aware of is um, a bill by Senator Weiler. It is SB 206 with the innocuous title of Estate Planning Amendments. And it it does a couple of good things. It clarifies that somebody um who has a guardian is, under certain circumstances, still able to enter into a still able to have a power of attorney or an advanced healthcare directive. Um, so that's good from our perspective. The concerning part is that it includes language that says that if a person has a is under guardianship prior to May of this year, that the guardianship does not specifically address whether they have the right to vote or hold public office, um, that they are presumed not to be able to vote or hold public office. It also it also says that for guardianships granted after May of this year, that the court has to specifically address whether the person has the right to vote or hold public office. As you might imagine, the most concerning part of that is the presumption that somebody, whether if they have guardianship, that they are presumed not to be able to vote or hold public office. So we're going to be talking with Senator Weiler and others about potentially reversing that presumption and saying that unless a court says otherwise, an individual with a guardianship is presumed to be able to vote or hold public office. So we'll keep you posted on how those conversations are progressing as well.
I will just add to what Andrew said on that last bill, and mention one other bill I want to flag for this on these two topics. Um, the voting language in the guardianship bills is largely related to, so the Utah Constitution, the Utah State Constitution says that people who are quote unquote mentally incompetent do not have the right to vote or hold office. We have always at the DLC, along with the courts, presumed that is not that the definition of incapacitated for people who have guardians do not meet that level. The only mention of incompetence in state code is with respect to those who have been adjudicated incompetent in a competency restoration hearing through the courts. And so about 2 or 3 months ago, an attorney who practices in this space wrote a Bar Journal article suggesting that Utah should clarify exactly what that means. And so I know that got passed around to a few legislators. And so there's also SB 167 from Senator Reedy that mentions that exact same language that Senator Weiler's bill that Andrew noted has in it. And so we've had conversations with her, and I think she is willing to change that language. But when we saw Weiler's bill come out, it became clear that we're going to have a few conversations with other legislators about this as well. So I think we are at least somewhat hopeful that we can get them to reverse that presumption. I don't think that is what the Bar Review article says. I don't think is encouraging this. My understanding is the drafting attorney may have interpreted it their own way, and so we're hoping we can change that. One other voting bill I did want to flag before we move on to some budget items is there's also another bill from Representative Wilcox that seeks to create a separate elections office apart from it's currently elections are overseen by the Lieutenant Governor's office. And this bill would actually make it an independent office that would be would have a director that is chosen by the county clerks, and how those county clerks are appointed to this selection committee is by the legislature and the governor and the state auditor. I will say, like, we're keeping an eye on this one. It's not specifically disability related, but who oversees our elections and how that is done is certainly something we want to be mindful of. And so I think we do have some concerns with removing it from the lieutenant governor's office for in an elected position to an appointed position that how they get appointed was a little bit murky. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on. I believe it's HB 369, if I remember correctly. I will verify that when I'm done talking to make sure I'm not just giving you a horribly wrong number, but I believe that is right. There are a lot of other bills that Andrew and I could certainly talk about. So there are two things. One, I want to say that I think if I didn't mention at the beginning, if people have questions, by all means, put them in the chat or raise your hand. Andrew and I are more than happy to answer specific questions about bills that we have brought up or bills you've heard about. Certainly want to be mindful of this. It is the state of the session, so we're open to taking questions at any time. So please throw those out there. All right. Well, I said that and we got a question. I see a hand raised. Well, Andrew, then I will pause and take a question.
Hi, Nate. Thank you. This is Jenny Coftenow. It's great to see.
Jenny.
Hi. It's great to see you and Andrew here again. I'm wondering about something that caught my eye. Have you seen the RFA by Representative Lisenby for the DSPD waitlist?
Yes. So actually, you know what? You preempted where we were going next. Great question, great timing. Right now, obviously,
I was just going to add before we move on, if folks want to follow along or try to follow along with what we are talking about, both our bill and budget tracker are available on our DLC policy page, which if you do want to follow along, you can go to disabilitylawcenter.org slash public dash slash issues slash public dash policy. And if you scroll about halfway down the page, you will see links to the bill and the budget tracker, so you can join in the full fun that we are having up here. And with that, I'll give it back to you to dive into the budget a bit, Nate.
Yeah, so that was one of the things we wanted to touch on. I know a lot of folks are certainly watching what is happening with um, the waiting list funding and other things in social services appropriations. Um, as of now, I think we've had actually what, 4 meetings from social services, I believe, this year. They have moved to an every other day schedule. So it was Monday, Wednesday, Friday of last week, and it'll be Tuesday and Thursday of this week, and I believe Monday of next. And so it's a little less frequently meeting than it had in previous years, which has been kind of interesting. They're moving rather quickly, but also because you have to wait an extra day, it feels like it's moving slower. There are a number of requests. The governor obviously made a request in his proposed budget for waitlist funding. I know Representative Lisenby has a request. I think also Representative Daley Provo has a request, I believe, for waitlist funding. So I think we're going to be looking at all of those. The thing I will say that has come up this year that I think is worth noting is there was a discussion early last week about a $20 million savings that social services appropriations has found in transitioning Medicaid dental from being basically transferring it to the University of Utah Dental School. They already do part of it, but they were able to, I think, transition everyone on Medicaid to this program. And with some partnerships they were able to work out, and that created a $20 million savings. In a budget year where we have heard there's not a lot of money available, $20 million ongoing is no small chunk of change. And I think we wanted to note that for folks on this call because obviously, as Representative Lisenby in leadership has a request, I think this is something that is gives me hope that they will get some funding for the waiting list this year. But I think there is reason to think if we have $20 million in savings, there is maybe some room to put more of that towards the waiting list. And so I would encourage folks to reach out to social services appropriations committee members. Representative Lisenby, anyone in leadership, and encourage them saying, there's this $20 million savings, and we think, this is a year where you might be able to do a little bit more for the waiting list than even is being suggested. So I think it is worth trying to push them because I think it's not often you get a $20 million savings ongoing. And I think this could be really used for some of that. And certainly many other causes, as many of you know, going to social services appropriations committee meetings, there are any number of great causes and things they need to fund. And so, if there's something I think you're also keeping an eye on, that would be, there is savings this year, I think. So Andrew, is there anything else you want to touch on the budget?
Just one other quick thing, Nate. And that is, as I was going through and spending hours yesterday updating the budget tracker for you all from social services. One of the things that I noticed that I wanted to highlight for you is there is a legislator has made a request to provide a cost of living adjustment in rate increase for DSPT providers, a bunch of facility providers, and potentially some other provider groups as well. Digging into that a little bit more just to identify exactly which provider group would qualify, but it's it wouldn't be a ton for any particular provider group, but the very idea that there would be a an increase to at least keep up with inflation year over year is something that we've heard whispered about for the last couple of years, but this is the first time that I remember seeing it publicly. So if any of you have been talking about an idea like that, uh, uh, good good work and keep it up. And maybe maybe this is a baby step to some of the bigger possibilities that Nate was just talking about as well. So.
And Andrew, I see a couple of people asking in the chat about the savings I was just mentioning. So the savings come from transitioning Medicaid enrollees to getting dental care from the dental school. And to your question, Aubrey, that you posed, this was a lively debate in social services about this very thing and the question of how would that work? And so and again, I am certainly not an expert, and I think you could go back and listen to that discussion, but my understanding is there have been a lot of partnerships created and ways to make it work. That it's really not just the dental school, but essentially it's a cost savings shift. So it's really just shifting, I think, some of that cost to the university, and they've been able to work that out. And so I have talked to one of the legislators who I think is who I will keep nameless at this time, who I've talked to about this program a little bit. I know that they were able to kind of help facilitate some of this. I think their belief is that actually this will create a better network. I do not know if that's true. Certainly, it's something we'll have to keep an eye on. But my understanding is that the intent is not to make this like a worse program for anyone and their dental care. Just that it's kind of a cost savings shift they were able to make happen to really free up some state funds. But ultimately, the goal is to make sure that everyone still receives the good dental coverage across the state. So many of the rural legislators had your very question of like, how does this work? And so there was certainly a good discussion about that. And I think everyone was saying it should work fine. So again, the devil's always in the details, and we can't guarantee it, but that's my understanding. And to the question about if there's a recommended dollar target for additional funding, hey, I'm not here to tell you how much you can ask for. I think if you think all 20 million should go to the waiting list, I think that's certainly fair to ask. Whether they're going to do that or not, I certainly couldn't say. I'm just saying that there's a $5 million ask right now, or roughly 5 million. I think that number could be a little higher if there is some additional savings to be found. So, whether that's $10 million, whether that's 15, I think just say that they should put more funding than they're already asking for if there's those savings to be found. You're still muted, Andrew. So.
Nate, I was just gonna add to that I was surprised by the amount of some of the requests that I saw looking the size of some of the requests that I saw looking through the list yesterday, because legislative leadership has made clear that since December, that after accounting for all of their tax cuts and everything else that they want to do, that they expect there to be $0 in new money available. So if um if there is going to be money that's able to be spent on additional money that's able to be spent on existing programs, or money that's available for new programs, it likely is going to have to come from finding savings in existing programs like the dental school idea that Nate just talked about. So we are working from the presumption that there will be very little to no money available for uh, for um, new programs, and we're trying to figure out what that uh, how to work with that and what that looks like. So.
I see a couple more questions in the chat, Andrew. One is asking, they see money going year after year to increase services through ABA and ABA-focused facilities. Is there pushback on the Hill regarding concerns with ABA ethics and lack of efficacy? is there an interest on the Hill for funding alternative evidence-based services to ABA?
Yeah. The answer to the first question is that there actually is a request for additional funding for ABA providers this year. Again, just saw that yesterday. And I think we, internally within the DLC, we have heard from some folks in the community that there are segments of the community that have concerns about ABA. But given that we are given that we are not experts in the field, we have not felt like we have that we have been able to authoritatively say to policymakers one way or the other that it is good or it is bad, or you should do this or you shouldn't do this, because we know that there are a whole range of feelings and experiences with ABA in the community. And to answer the second part of the question, as far as I know, I have not heard that anybody has raised concerns or issues or good or problematic experiences, if there are any, related to ABA with anybody in the legislature yet. That isn't to say that it hasn't been. There aren't people talking about it. It just hasn't made it out into the public conversation that Nate or I hear. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, Nate, but.
No, I think you handled that perfectly, Andrew. I see another question about HB 52 that changes copay accumulators in Utah. We are aware of this bill. So this bill would actually, for folks who get copay assistance for certain high cost medications, basically sometimes insurance companies do not apply the amount spent on those medications to a person's deductible. And so if you're getting copay assistance from a family member, let's say they give you money to help you pay for it, that would go toward your deductible. However, if you're getting copay assistance from a manufacturer, which happens with a lot of expensive drugs for people with cancer or people with other long-term health conditions, that money is not applied to your deductible. This bill would essentially require that it did go to your deductible. This bill's been around for about, I think, 5 years now. I know that the American Cancer Society of Utah has been largely spearheading that effort, and we certainly have supported the bill in the past. Honestly, I would say, somewhat optimistic this year that it was going to go through when they had gotten former Representative Kira Birkeland to run that bill. She seemed likely to be, if anyone was going to get it done, she seemed likely she could. Unfortunately, she resigned just before the session, and they had to find a new sponsor this year. I believe it's Candace Perucci, Representative Perucci, and I think they're still hopeful, but I think my conversations with the Cancer Society folks is they're not as certain this year it's going to get through with the new sponsor or not. But certainly it's on our radar, something that we've supported and we'll put our support behind, and hopefully they can finally get that one to move through this year.
Nate, if you're okay,
Yes.
I know we have a lot of questions still in the chat, but just to keep us on track, if you're okay with it, I'm going to go ahead and let Kurt Phillips talk a little bit about early intervention. But if Nate and Andrew would stay on just for a little bit longer, if we have a little bit more time in the end, I'd love to really quickly be able to, if we have a little more time, answer some questions. But also if you have some time to go through the chat too and answer that way too, that's great. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Nate and Andrew. Appreciate you guys. And thanks for like coming to us live from the Capitol. So that's great. All right. Thank you so much for your questions, you guys. Keep putting them in the chat. And Kurt Phillips, please, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Kurt is going to do that. And I'm going to just really quickly introduce Kurt and then give him the floor. So Kurt is with the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice at Utah State University. He was born on the Central Coast of California. He attended Allen Hancock Community College and later earned a bachelor's in exercise science from 1995 from Brigham Young University. He continued his education at UC San Francisco and San Francisco State University, where he received a master's degree in physical therapy in 1997. After a lengthy absence from schooling, Kurt finished his disability disciplines doctoral program at Utah State University in 2013 with a focus on balance systems in the elderly population. He has been a physical therapist in the Up to 3 early intervention program at the IDRPP since moving to Logan in 2000. He has continued his clinical work with the Up to 3 program and is currently also the director of the services division here at the Institute. He loves the outdoors, especially backpacking and river rafting. And Kurt has worked very hard this session and for the past year on getting some movement around funding for early intervention. So Kurt is going to take the floor. And again, please feel free to keep putting questions in the chat. We should still have some more time before we take a break. Thanks. Go ahead, Kurt.
All right. Thanks, Aubrey. Thanks for that introduction. I really need to update my profile on the I am all those things and I have done all those things, but I am also a father of 7 and have loved working with the early intervention program here at Utah State University. Aubrey asked me if I just take a few minutes and introduce a little bit about early intervention and some of the things that we've been doing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I just have a really brief slideshow that I'd like to share with you just a little bit about what's going on with early intervention. So I'm hoping you all see that first slide about what early intervention is. I've come to find out over the last year in working with legislators and others who have an interest in early intervention that it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In my world, early intervention is the Part C early intervention, which is Part C under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But I've come to find out that other people think of early intervention as the home visiting program that's run through the Department of Health and Human Services, or Early Head Start, or doctors' visits on a regular basis with young children. And so I just want to clarify a little bit about what early intervention is with regard to the Part C early intervention. So Part C in the state of Utah is funded through the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's under the organization of the Baby Watch program. There's a Baby Watch website that you could look and see. It's throughout the state of Utah, and on that website, it lists all the different programs through the different areas. I'm involved with the Up to 3 early intervention program, which is up here in Cache, Box Elder, and Rich County. Early intervention Part C has been around in Utah since the mid-1980s. Our previous director of the Services Division, Sue Olson, has been a part of that early intervention program since the inception in 1985, I believe. It is, as I said, part of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Part C is the 0 to 3 portion of that, and then Part B is the 3 through 21 portion of that, the school district part of that. We do serve kids 0 to 3 years old with a diagnosed disability or a developmental delay that qualifies them for our program. This program is different from those others I mentioned, the home visiting program, as well as the Early Head Start program, in that we're not an income-based program, and our real qualification is based on that diagnosed disability. We don't have a waiting list, and so when kids are referred to our program, we're required to have a plan of services in place within 45 days of referral. And then once that plan's in place, we have a requirement to begin services within 45 days after that plan. There are 14 programs throughout the state of Utah. We're all independent. I believe our contracts call us contractors. We do have a consortium where we meet together and talk about common issues, successes, and difficulties. In our contract, there are certain specific requirements we have to follow to be able to be a contractor with the Department of Health and Human Services and with the Baby Watch early intervention program statewide. What we've been working on over the last year and really over the last many years has to do with what we're talking about here, funding and what types of things we need to do to continue working to keep the program viable and in best practices. We do receive funding from a variety of different places. We receive some funding from our state contract with Baby Watch in the Department of Health and Human Services. We receive some federal dollars through the Office of Special Education Programs. We also bill Medicaid for services for those children who are eligible for Medicaid, as well as CHIP and some nominal parent fees. So that's where we get our funding from. The concern has been there for quite a while. Since 2017, we haven't had a sustained increase in funding, which presents a number of problems. One, obviously, there's been a significant amount of inflation. Cost of living has increased quite significantly. I have concerns for my kids and for a lot of people that I know in being able to afford a house and afford those living standards that have changed so much over the last 7 to 10 years. We have had some funding that has come through the ARPA funds during COVID and some one-time funding that has been allocated to us. But our current challenges that we are trying to address in this legislative session have to do with three main pillars. One is the ability to recruit new providers. And I think Sue Olson said it best when we had a meeting. She said, right now, because of the low salaries in the Part C early intervention field, we're not only not able to recruit people right now, but it's not a viable career path for many who are coming out of schools. Here at Utah State University, we collaborate with the College of Education and often have special education students come in and do internships with us. And the numbers of those who have come over to do internships with us have decreased significantly over the last 10 years or so, because when they go to match with their site that they want to do their internship with, they recognize the salaries between or within the early intervention Part C programs are not a viable career option. So recruitment has been very difficult. Retention of staff has been difficult. We compete primarily with the school districts. The school districts, and I'll show this on an upcoming slide, pay significantly more for their bachelor prepared teachers than we are able to pay for our bachelor prepared providers. All providers in the Part C program are required to have at least a bachelor's degree in an applicable field, such as special education or family human development, social work, those sorts of fields. The third thing that we are challenged with is a number of kids that are in our program. You can see there, fiscal year 21, we had almost 16,000 children enrolled statewide in the Part C early intervention programs. In fiscal year 22, it bumped up to 16,500, but in fiscal year 23, it dropped back down below the 16,000 person mark. And we know that Utah's growing. All you've got to do is look around and see all the homes and residences being built. And it's concerning to us as providers that we are having fewer kids enrolled, and we worry that we're missing kids with those disabilities or with developmental delays we should be finding. And as we've talked as a consortium and as we've given information to our parent agencies, much of this is around just the lack of staffing, that we're not able to have the adequate staff to be able to aggressively go out and find those children like we'd like to. So what I would ask is of those folks that are here on this call today, if you have been affected in any way by a Part C early intervention program, be it as a client of a Part C early intervention program, be it as a parent or a grandparent, an uncle or an aunt, a friend, or a loved one of someone who has benefited from the Part C early intervention program, we'd ask you to consider contacting legislators and contacting people that might have influence. Currently, there is a building block grant that was put forth by Baby Watch and DHHS that was put on the governor's budget of $1.5 million. The Providers Consortium has been working with Representative Jason Thompson from District 3 up here in Cache Valley to try to push forth a request for appropriations that will help to cover some of those salaries. You can see the numbers in there, the data we've collected as a consortium compared with the school district data that we've gathered shows almost a $3,000 difference monthly between what teachers are paid and what the Part C early interventionists are paid. And so we'd encourage you to contact legislators or those to help support not only this 1.5 million that's been put forth by DHHS and the Baby Watch program, but also to consider supporting the request for appropriations that has been submitted and will likely be presented to the Appropriations Committee, the Social Service Appropriations Committee this week by Representative Thompson. That's what I have, Aubrey. I hope that works for what you needed. And thank you everyone for listening and for supporting as you can our cause.
Thank you so much, Kurt. We do have a question from Christine Humphrey, who wants to know why the fiscal year 23 decrease does it come from dropping birth rates overall? And then we have a couple more questions, and I'll just let folks know we have about 5 more minutes to just open up the floor for questions, whether it be for Kurt on early intervention or to Nate and Andrew on the session as a whole. So please feel free to put your questions in.
So Aubrey, he answered the question. This is he answered that
great.
question.
Thank you, Christine. I'm so focused on
I know, it's fine.
Thank you.
So
Go ahead,
Steve, in answer your question, Steve, the funding that we do get for the Part C programs comes from the general fund. And so I'm not a legislative guy. I don't know how it all ties in together, but it does come from the general fund. The portion that comes from the state does come from the general fund. Is there any other questions? I don't think there's any other for me in the chat.
We do have one for Nate and Andrew that I'll read aloud. Disabled chronic pain patients have been the victim of the opioid epidemic. All of the opioid settlement money went towards harm reductionists. Meanwhile, so sorry, my chat is moving. Many of us in the disabled community were forced tapered, medically abandoned, and some of us have died due to the 2016 guidelines. Is anybody tracking the impact the opioid epidemic has had on the disabled community?
I know Andrew and I had some conversations a few years ago about this with some people in this space. I don't know, Andrew, if you have other thoughts on this. Well, I don't know. If you have other thoughts on this, I'm gonna turn it over to you if you have other great thoughts on this. This is a tough one.
I don't have thoughts, Nate, but I would like to have thoughts. And so if you would like to share information with us or have a conversation about it, preferably after the session, we would very much be open to that and would like to learn more and figure out if there is something that we can do or should be doing in this space.
Andrew and I think too much alike. We spent too much time together because that was going to be my my thought too. Is yeah, just reach out to us after the session. Let's have a conversation and figure out how we can get involved. I see one other question to us that I actually was going to touch on if we had time. So great question about the bills related to masking. We have been pretty focused on HB 312 from Representative Lisenby, which actually makes it a crime to wear a mask if you are in a public space and with others who are masking. We have a great deal of concern about it. My understanding right now is there's actually going to be a second substitute that should come out today that, based on the text I've received while we were on this call from somebody who's spoken to Representative Lisenby staff, I'm a little unclear exactly what it's going to do, but at a minimum, it should make a medical exemption, but it might be removing the provision altogether and then changing it to an enhancement. So I will say that right now we are following it closely. It is up in committee today at 2. If it stays as written, we would certainly oppose that and try to have that changed. I think there's a great deal of concern about it. It is very, very broad. So it is not a particularly good bill, but my understanding is there's going to be a change that should improve it. If it does just make it so that it would be a medical exemption, I would still have concern that then people with disabilities could be questioned about why they're wearing a mask, which creates a whole mess of problems that I would have. So again, we're going to be watching closely, but before going too far, we just have to keep an eye on what exactly happens with the second substitute. And we're happy to keep you updated on that. I think the other one, 294, if I'm remembering, I'd have to go back and look. I think that's from McPherson. And I think that was trying to say you had to provide accommodation or an accommodation to somebody who couldn't wear one for a medical or for medical reasons, if I'm remembering correctly, if that's the bill, I think it is. If I'm mistaken, I will go back and look and try to get a better answer at some point, and happy to follow up offline. But I think that one seemed to be a little less problematic, just in that I think it would already be required under the ADA. But I would have to go back and look at the specific language to remember exactly. But
Thank you, Nate. I'm gonna pose this last question to Kurt, and then I'm gonna keep us moving along just so that we make sure we all get a break.
Yeah,
Kurt,
and I've got it in the
Yeah.
chat as the one from Lauren there. I'll answer real quick. So Lauren, I appreciate your question. I think it's great. We do have built into the request for appropriations that Representative Thompson has submitted. They have what they call a small program fee for a lot of the rural areas, because it is more difficult to find providers. And so we have asked in that RFA for an additional amount of money to be put toward those smaller, more rural programs, so that they will be able to incentivize people to work in those rural areas based on that increased funding above and beyond the percentage that would come to each of the programs. And so to your question, I would just mention focusing on the request for appropriations, because it's built into that we will have an added incentive for those rural programs to be able to hire some other staff.
thank
I
you.
hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you so much again, Kurt, Nate, Andrew. Appreciate you all so much. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to let us know what's going on. Before we take a break, I wanted to keep you all here and give us just a moment to go over what is coming up next. So